somebody had made this viral tweet a while ago that was like, y'all tell people to go to therapy when I think what you mean is that we need to have a revolution. Like, because this overrepresentation of Black women therapists on TV is not real, y'all. It's just a recreation of the mammy stereotype.
Hey, I'm Queen. Welcome to the channel. If you're new here, hey boo, and if you're not new here, thanks for coming through again. I appreciate you. Today we are talking about therapy, all things therapy. It is Mental Health Awareness Month. I know we're at the end of it, but I actually had this plan since April, but my technology had other things in mind, which I'll get into later. For this video, it's going to be a community conversation. My friend and also friend of the channel, Dr. Money, on to talk about all things therapy. Dr. Money is a retired-ish therapist, also a host of QueerWOC and Rebound Revolution podcast. Therapy as it relates to capitalism, therapy as it relates to being a part of pop culture, therapy in relations to diagnosis. Just lots of stuff. It was a really, really great conversation that I know you are going to enjoy. I haven't been on YouTube for a little minute because I'm having huge tech issues. My computer needs to be repaired and it just costs a lot of money and I'm unemployed and I don't have it. So I may be posting more next month. It depends on how soon I can get my computer situation together. Just be aware that I'm recording this with my phone, so sound may be a little airy. So if the sound isn't as crisp as it always is, that is why. But I'm not apologizing for that because I am a creative with no money and this is what you get. Now that I think about it, this is the perfect time for me to insert the Patreon plug. Today's video sponsor is the Mixed Vixen Patreon fam. Thank you for being a patron. Become a Mixed Vixen patron for as low as $2 a month to help sustain this platform and help me get my computer together. Had to throw that in there. You will get exclusive content if you become a patron. If another subscription is not your thing, because I know that we are at the point of subscription fatigue, I feel you. If you would still like to support, you can donate through Venmo or Cash App. I'll accept that too. I'll appreciate that as well. And don't remember to like, subscribe, and give this video a thumbs up because I love those too. Now let's get started with my conversation with Dr. Money about therapy.
I guess I'll start this conversation with, Black people are getting therapy now, or we're a lot less skeptical than our parents were about therapy.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. So there's been kind of a little shift, which seems for the better. How have that sudden shift affected your profession or affected being a therapist now that we all are interested in therapy now? What does that mean for the Black therapists?
Yeah, so that's a great question, but I feel like before I get there, I want to back up a little bit and really talk about what therapy is, because I think that shift has also impacted what people think therapy is. So life coaching is not therapy. Like sitting down with your good friend and being like, girl, you good? Like, what's going on? Like, that is not therapy. Taking it to your higher power is not therapy. So, I actually had to jot this down and break down a definition of therapy. And I feel like there's really 6 components to it. And this is informed by some of the I used to teach this class called Intro to Counseling. So this is a very, very old study, but it still hits. I think it was published in the 60s, but it still hits. But basically, the 6 elements that I think you have to be like, oh, this is therapy is 1, it has to be a relationship. So that person has to know you. You have to know them.
Okay.
It can't be parasocial. Okay, Dr. Joy Harden Bradford is not your therapist.
And she says it every episode. But she's not.
So it's a relationship and it's prolonged, but it's restricted. So I'm not going to see you all day, all throughout my life. It's a restricted relationship between 2 or more people. That's the first thing. 2 is that one of the participants initiated this relationship because they are having an experience in their life that is causing them some kind of like distress. Right. So this is not a spontaneous relationship. This is one that one or more people initiated to deal with something. And then one of the participants, I would say one or more, because I've done co-therapy before, has to have some special training in mental health, in emotional wellness, in human relationships, in human dynamics, in something related to how to have this conversation beyond just like a regular check-in that you would have with a friend, right? So they have to either know the science, the history, the social, emotional, the biopsychosocial of how people work in order to help you with the thing that you initiated the relationship for. And then the fourth thing is that the methods used by that person who has expertise involve therapeutic interventions, right? So this is really where I think therapy and life coaching differ because therapists use things like reflection, reframing, maybe sometimes suggestions, that kind of stuff. Where life coaches or other people that folks seek out, maybe even like religious workers, they are going to be very directive. And I think a lot of times people come to therapy thinking that I'm going to tell them what to do in their life.
What to do. Yeah. That's what I thought at first too. Because I'm like, can you tell me what to do? Because I don't. That's why I'm here. And they were like, no.
Yeah. I remember back in the day, I think my first exposure to therapy was my guidance counselor at school, right? And so guidance is like the key word there when it comes to therapy. Like I could tell you what has worked for most people according to like, the literature that we have. I can tell you my experience. I can tell you according to this theory of therapy that I use. But to tell you, to be directive, to go out and tell you to do something, that is not therapy because it's taking away your autonomy. And any therapy is voluntary. You have a say in every step. And then another side of that, just my personal experience as a therapist, whenever I have been like, you know what, you got to stop talking to that person, my client will double down and be like, so we back together. So when I do tell you something, you don't even take the advice. So it's like, no, this, yeah. So therapy is intervention based around like giving you perspective and widening your perspective. It's not about directives. Okay. And then I think the last thing I wanted to say about that, well, maybe two more things. So that the methods that the therapist used is based in like researched, theoretically driven stuff. It's not just based on their own personal experience. Yeah.
That's a key. That's a good differentiation to make. Yeah.
Yeah. And then probably the most important thing, therapy ends when whatever was bothering you is not bothering you anymore. That was the purpose of this relationship, was to help you work through this thing. And so once you work through that thing, there's no more reason to have this relationship. Unless, something else comes up in your life and, why switch therapists if you're like, okay, I already know you, now I got this new problem, Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to do that first, like what therapy is, because
yeah.
No,
I appreciate that. I appreciate you starting it from one-on-one.
Yeah.
It's important. It's important. It's important.
Yeah.
So now we know what therapy is. And we have a lot more Black people who are not skeptical of therapy, which is a great thing. So a lot more of us want therapy. Like, why do you think, first of all, I guess I'll start with, why do you think that shift even happened for us?
I think the shift happened because we didn't have any kind of like community revolution. So we had to move into like the managed care medical model of dealing with what's coming up for us. So like, oh, I wasn't there back in the 50s and 60s,
Yeah.
but first of all, like the creation of therapy as a field was very new during that time, right? And also during that time, we had the current events of the moment were medical institutions taking advantage of exploiting, harming our communities, be it Black people, be it women, be it queer folks. Like we did not have great relationships with these like medical institutions, right? And to be honest, even in like the field of marriage and family therapy, where I ended up getting my PhD, I also have a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling, which I like to say is baby psychiatry. It's like the little sister degree of like a psychiatry degree because it's very medical model. They weren't even considering us in those studies, right? Like all those old studies from the 50s and 60s are like norm reference on white suburban wealthy families, right? Like uh yeah. And so my field, marriage and family therapy, kind of the reason why it even started is because folks were like, we want to work with other populations. Y'all are not talking about disability. Y'all are not talking about relationships. What about poor people? and so MFT kind
what
of
about them?
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So like MFT kind of formed from that breakaway. Like it was literally a fight at the American Psychological Association conference, and the therapist that left went on to create AAMFT. Long story, but during this whole time, we know what like Black folks were doing. You know, the 50s, 60s, and 70s is like a time of like social unrest, like civil change. But what it also was a time where we were deeply, deeply connected to each other. Like, you know, I just think about, I went to college in Alabama. So just learning the carpooling that was existing to get folks to work, the meal trains that were happening, because it's like, okay, y'all out there protesting, I know y'all not cooking, so we gonna make the food, and so when y'all done protesting, y'all got food. Or like Fannie Lou Hamer starting a whole farm to feed people. You know, it's like we don't have that now. It didn't stick. We didn't have a communal revolution. I honestly think like capitalism ramped up so much to make it impossible for us to keep those networks. So
My
I
mother
think
always blames the 80s for that.
really, oh
like that time, because the 70s, that was still something that we were trying to insert in, like the communal aspect of things. So that stuff was still happening. And then the late 70s, 80s, for my mom, as someone who lived through those things, for her, the 80s was just like capitalism, get money, crack.
yeah. That's how my mom sums up the 80s too. She like, you get your money or you own crack, or maybe you're doing both. Okay. Yeah. You know, I feel like I need to think about this more, but I hadn't thought about how like I think the last time we talked was like this, like the hashtag Black excellence, and like how that push. Because I think I was like just young enough, but just old enough to be part of the generation that's like, go to college. Oh, you gotta, like be independently successful as a Black person to get anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. I do think the 90s are very intricate in that. Like the kind of the bootstrap Black liberation stuff. Like, I definitely see the 90s as that. It's like, go to college, get an education, feed your family, and if all of you do that, then the collective will be good. And it's like that's not how
That's not how it works.
Revolution works.
Yeah. and so I think now we're all at the age where we see that failed. Like from older Gen Zers to like older millennials, we all like, that shit ain't work. So we got to try something else to be well, to be like spiritually, emotionally, psychologically well. I also think we are the product of a generation that the push through mentality did not work either. Like we saw what impact the like push through mentality had on our parents, what not talking about stuff. Me and my sisters talk a lot about this of like, it don't help nobody to be silent about something that happened,
Yes.
And so I think seeing the results of that also kind of created like this wave of Black people being like, well, let me see what therapy talking about, because
I want to touch a little on, it's related, but the segue isn't real cute. But we're all talking about therapy. Therapy is now pop culture. Although access is still limited, there is something that I like to call pop therapy, where everyone knows the language. Well, they know the word. I don't think they know exactly what these words mean. So they know they know what a diagnosis is or whatever. But for my personal opinion is that we're running around with tools how to use and tools we want to train to use. And I wanted to know your thoughts on like pop therapy. Is it effective? I do think for some people who have no access to therapy, it does help them name certain things to hear about stuff. But it still makes me uncomfortable. So I wanted to know what you thought about pop therapy and its effectiveness or not effectiveness.
Yeah. So I actually do think that's a good segue from the last question, because the last question left me thinking about like our perception of like, oh, the stigma of therapy is actually like lessening in the Black community. It's not. I actually get frustrated when I hear people talk about, oh, Black folks don't do therapy. I'm like, that has not been true for like decades now. So,
maybe you don't do therapy.
Yes, exactly. And then you can't talk about us having a stigma historically around seeking therapy without talking about the violence that the institution of psychotherapy did to our community too. So in thinking about that, it's like, so the last publication, like the most recent publication on basically Black people and therapy, came out of Massachusetts, and it actually came out earlier this year. 25% of Black people report having been to therapy at some point in their life. That to me is statistically significant. If 1 in 4 Black people are in therapy, it's like I come from a family of 5, and I 3 of us have been to therapy, so it's like that is a huge shift. And also, who was it? HRC did a survey of LGBTQ youth and queer Black youth. So like, I think their ages are like 18 to 25 or something. 33% of them reported being in therapy. That's a third of queer Black youth are in therapy, in K through 12 schools, because I work the health department now, so I see these reports, in K through 12 schools, 40% of Black students report seeing their counselor on a regular basis. So it's like, this is actually a real thing. It's actually changing. And if we look at if we look at it just by numbers, it seems to be that like every decade, 10% more Black people go to therapy. So, that's
okay. We're doing pretty good then.
It's like we on a wave. And I feel like some of those pop psychology things are reasons why. So something you said was like, the language has kind of gone mainstream, but I don't think the understanding has.
Yes.
Yeah, I think.
Like if I hear another person call someone, just call them a liar. If you call them a gaslighter, I'm like, no, they're just a liar. They're just a liar.
They're just regular lying. Like, that's it. It's not. They're not trying to like rewrite your emotional experience of something. They just lied. That's it. It's okay. It's okay to just be a liar. This is the thing. I used to talk about this on QueerWOC with the mental moment, is that I think people gravitate towards these words because they hit different. So it's like, if the hurt I'm feeling is so big, it can't just be a lie. I'm like, yes, it can. Lying hurts. Like that is a trust break in a
Yeah,
relationship.
that's a form of betrayal. Like
Yes.
lying is as big as you feel
Yeah.
it is. But I think that because it's been so normalized, no, it's like
Mhm.
lying is just something that you could just,
Yeah.
oh, this is a liar.
Mhm.
That I guess that's why people search for other words. But there's so many times I hear people say, "Oh, that's better than me," and I'm like, they're just lying. Like
They're
they're not.
lying. Yeah. They're yeah, it's a lie, boo boo. I think because we live what did that little girl say? You a whole lie. I think because we live in a whole lie, right? Like
Yes.
this lie of capitalism, this lie of white supremacy, this lie of ableism, like that I think because we live through so many lies, we like dilute how impactful being lied to really is.
Yes.
And I'm like,
Hmm.
no, that shit is real. It hurts, okay? but like no, gaslighting is like when somebody is trying to present reality to you in
Hmm.
a way that like totally erases your experience of it, right? Like that is not what happened. You should not be reacting this way because that's not what happened. And it's like, yes, do people gaslight? Absolutely. It is a classic abusive tactic, but that's
Hmm.
not the same as somebody lying, right? Like, it's not the same. It's
Or like everyone who's mean to you is a narcissist. I'm just like,
yeah. Don't get me started on personality disorders. It's like you know what's so fascinating to me about like pop psychology is the way that they can make these like little memes or carousels to make every diagnosis sound relatable. So,
mm,
so you be on the page and you be like, "Oh, that's me. Oh, maybe I'm on the spectrum. Maybe I have, you know, a narcissistic personality disorder." And it's like that's not to say that you might see yourself and be like, "Oh, this is valid. Like maybe I should talk to somebody about this." But not all of us. That's the point. That's the point of a diagnosis, right? The diagnosis, I like to think about it like a bell curve. It's like we all have these traits.
mhm.
It's just a fact of humanity, right? But when they get up and stuck, like I can't move out of having this trait. I can't turn it
Okay.
off or turn it on. It feels like pervasive, insistent, like consistent across context, across time, then that's a diagnosis, right? Like
Got
that
it.
that's the difference. Does somebody portray, you know, narcissistic tendencies, you know, like that thing you said or the what is it called? The dark triad that makes up, you know, sociopathy. Like yes, all of us have the like capacity to like exhibit those things. But maybe you just caught me on a Thursday after I was I had it, you know, and I was
Yeah.
ready for the weekend. Am I like that to you consistently, like insistently, so you correct me and I still do it? And persistently, like, do you see me treat other people this way as well? You know?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
those three things are what I always think about with diagnosis, like consistent, insistent, and persistent. And yeah, I just think we can't all be because if we are, then it's not a diagnosis. It's just a social phenomenon. Like what's happening in our generation where all of us have turned into like narcissists or gaslighters or you
Yeah.
know or autistic ADHD folks, you know? It's like, huh,
Yeah.
maybe we all identify with these traits because we've been on the computer for 3 years since the pandemic because short form content started dominating
Mhm.
because all these things in our social reality. But yeah, I guess it feels more controllable to think that it's you and not the world you live in.
Since we're talking about diagnoses, I'm gonna talk about Amanda Seales. I'm actually tired of talking about
Oh
Amanda
God.
Seales. Most of us know what happened on Club Shay Shay, where she spoke about. She said she was diagnosed with autism, then later on
Mhm,
said she was self-diagnosed,
mhm,
and that the cost of getting a diagnosis would be way too much, which is proven false. But what I want to touch on, because there's so much I can say about her, I want to talk about the self diagnosis
okay.
part of this. What does that mean? Or like,
Mhm,
is that a thing? I do believe in self actualization, but I also
yeah,
believe that a lot of us are like too new all of this stuff. We are just
Yeah.
too new to like
Yeah.
be like, that's what it is. Like this
Mhm.
is all, and I think we're all in a space, especially when you're marginalized. You're looking to feel. We all are looking for identity. We're all looking to
That
feel
part.
safe
Yeah.
somewhere. We're all looking to feel
Yeah.
validated in a world
Mhm.
that makes us feel invalidated all the time.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
think that what I'm saying is that a lot of these pop culture things feed that,
Mhm.
and doesn't, I don't know if it necessarily pushes us actually getting actual diagnosis.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Okay.
think I mean, yes, everything you said. Uh-huh. Um, yeah, I think there's two paths that I most commonly see with self-diagnosis. The one path is like I saw a bunch of these videos, I saw a bunch of these memes that I relate to, and I think I have this, and that's where it stops. Like people start
Mm-hmm.
hashtagging their posts with the diagnosis and change their at name to include the diagnosis. It's just like that's where it begins and ends and
Mm-hmm.
plays out is on social media. And then the other path I see is people might come across it through media, like maybe they watch a TV show and they like, oh snap, that I relate to that. Or, TikTok is like the number one place people search now, come across a YouTube video, but it sparks the idea and then people go into like a deep dive, right? So they're like, oh my gosh, what is this thing? What does it look like in black people? What does it look like in black girls? And then they seek out somebody who has the credentials, the experience, the background, or maybe even a connection to that community, right? So there's like
Yes.
a whole bunch of groups and pages, like social media, whatever, or like in person. Like therapy groups, I think are a great way to go to therapy if you can't afford it, because usually group therapy is cheaper, way cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
And to find people in person to be like, hey, I'm struggling with this thing too. So yeah, I feel like that path is, to me, the better path, because if you self-diagnose and don't seek out community or support, then you just gonna be struggling in silence. Like you just
Yeah.
it's not actually helping you to build your individual identity around this thing. I think about this with everything. It's also the reason why I still use the term lesbian to describe my sexuality. It's like identity is not just like I found the thing that describes my experience. Identity is also like political and should
Mm-hmm.
put you in community with other people. So I feel the same way about diagnoses. Like if this is something that I figured out is going on with me on my own, and then I sought out stuff for it and it's still confirmed, like, hey, yeah, this is what's going on with you. What's the point of me discovering that if I don't get support, community, know other people in real life that I could like touch or call that,
Mm-hmm.
that are dealing with the same stuff? I don't know what's going on with like the branding of diagnosis. Like,
I don't know either. It's been difficult for me because I don't want to be an ableist. I don't want to
mhm,
deny
mhm,
people of what they feel and what they experience. But I
mhm.
know I've had a few instances in my life where, let's say, I push back on something and the person's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm autistic."
Yeah.
And for me, that's what the Amanda thing felt like for me, because it's just
Yes.
like there are people
Yeah.
who I have family members who are autistic. I have family members who were schizophrenic. I have family members who went through depression.
Mhm.
So they've had all the things. They
Yeah.
were not bad people. There
This.
are
Yeah.
there are people who have things,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
there are people who are bad people. And
Yeah.
I don't like the way that
Yeah.
gets conflated with bad behavior. Bad
Yes.
behavior doesn't denote
Yes.
ADHD, or that it
Yes.
doesn't do that. And that's what I'm seeing happening.
Yeah.
And that's the feeling I got.
Because you are so right. And this is so harmful. I think a lot about young people too, because that's often the demographic that gets captured in like developmental motor adjustment disorders, right? Is young folks. So if we have grown ass people who are like using diagnosis language as like a shield of like, you can't come for me because of this, like then that harms like young people coming up behind you, right? Because now people have a perception of what this child is going to become. And that just makes it even worse. And you know, everything is compounded with Black youth. So it's like, it really frustrates me. And then the other thing in what you said is this is the difference between surviving and struggling with mental health. Like, we all have mental health. When you don't deal with your mental health, that's when you have mental health issues. like, and the whole point in coming to a conclusion around a diagnosis, like, oh my gosh, this is what has been the thing the whole time, is to like get you some coping skills, to like find ways to like connect and socialize that work for you, to like figure out ways to like tell people like your boundaries and your limits. It all of that to me is like healthy, right? Like all of that puts you in community. It doesn't like it doesn't put a wall up saying like I have this thing, therefore you can't. That feels like it puts you out of community. It's burning a bridge. And I would say I'm a narrative therapist, right? So um that combined with being a Black ass queer feminist, like I just think,
what is a narrative therapist?
oh, I'm so glad you asked, Queen. So narrative therapy it's actually a field of thought that came out of like women of color feminism, but it just got co-opted by white therapists writing about it. But our stories are political, they're personal, and that the language we use to tell our story matters. But I think the thesis statement of narrative therapy is people are not problems, problems are problems, right? So we struggle with things, we deal with things, but those problems exist in relationship to the society we exist in, right? So like neurodiversity wouldn't even be an issue if we structured like workplaces, schools, I would say mental health, but just health in general around the diversity of experience that we know people have when it comes to our brains. Like it wouldn't even be a disability, right? So narrative therapy really gets at that the problem is the problem. So we have to first of all separate you from identifying as a problem, and then talk about how do we relate differently to the spaces we're in, the relationships we're in, so that this problem isn't as big. It doesn't start to like swallow up our whole lives. The issue now is less about stigma and more about access. Black folks are the most underinsured group in the country, right? So we're insured at like half the rate as white people, right? So if we don't have health insurance that's covering it, even health insurance co-pays can be, preventative. Like, cost is a real thing. And then only 2% of licensed therapists are Black. 2%.
So for every 100 therapists,
exactly,
2 are Black. Just to give. Okay.
I definitely experienced that. Every setting I ever worked in, I was the only Black therapist, except for the last group practice I worked at. And my coworker who was Black was a man. This overrepresentation of Black women therapists on TV is not real, y'all. It's just a recreation of the mammy stereotype. It's like every therapist I see now on TV is a Black woman. And not just a Black woman, but a dark-skinned Black woman. I'm like, where y'all find it? Okay, y'all can't cast us for nothing else, but y'all can cast us to play a therapist. Meanwhile, I was the only person of color, not just Black, in my program for 3 whole years. So it's like, that's not the reality of the field. The reality of the field is wiggity white. Like very white. So I think access is really the thing now, because you get to the point of seeking therapy and then you bump in to a white woman who microaggresses you and you don't want to ever go back. Yeah. So the pop psychology piece, like I think the overrepresentation of Black women therapists on TV has had like an effect on, well, maybe I should check out therapy. I remember when Insecure was on, like when it was on TV, and so many people on Twitter was talking about how transformative it was for them to see Molly in therapy. And I also thought Molly paying good money for that therapist, because that office, let me tell y'all, that Molly was probably coming out the pocket like $250 a session. Okay.
Oh gosh.
But we'll get there. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I think those images, those representations are important for us to like see ourselves in those kind of spaces and like the possibility of what therapy can be. I also think on a lot of like the popular Black platforms, these big digital monopolies of therapy companies pay for ad space.
You're talking about something like BetterHelp. I've seen so many videos on YouTube from therapists and also people who receive therapy, and I just like talk about how harmful that it is. You just see the capitalism tied to
Yes.
this
Yes.
thing.
The BetterHelps, the talk spaces of the world, it's just pure capitalism. They're trying to do what Uber did to cabs to therapy. Like, you know, it's like, why? So from the therapist perspective, it's like, why pay to set up your own practice when you can just sign up for our app and we will find you clients, you know, and just like filter them to you. And I get it. I'm a person who never wanted to be a entrepreneur. You know, I never wanted to have my own business. So being in private practice was never my vibe. But also, like, to be paid $27 to $40 per session as somebody with
Wait. $27 to $40
yeah,
per
yeah,
session. That's
yeah,
what.
yeah.
Okay.
And that's like, that's good. Some therapists make even less than that on these apps. And it is it's a shit show. It's a mess. So either you are getting therapists who are like newly licensed, and so they're trying to build up their clientele on there, which means you getting somebody who likely did an unpaid internship, who now has student loans from getting a master's degree, and they're getting paid this low per session. Like, you know, so that's a recipe for burnout. It's like, oh, if I'm getting $30 a session, I gotta do 8 sessions a day minimum.
Yeah,
You know?
which will probably dilute your care as a person receiving the therapy. Yeah.
Exactly. By the 4th session of the day, you're not getting good therapy no more. You're not. No. You getting the tell me about that. You know? And or you have like seasoned therapists who this is their second, third job. And so in that situation too, you're not getting good therapy. It's like I was just at a clinic all day and now from 7 to 9 I'm doing sessions on BetterHelp. Yeah. And so it's just burnout all the way around. And I think the way they sell it is also harmful to therapy. Like, oh, if you don't like your therapist, you can just switch and get a new one. But part of why therapy should work is to work through relational like stuff, right? So this is something I wanted to say about the pop therapy too, but like ideally, you wouldn't be idolizing your therapist because this should be somebody that you should challenge, right? This is somebody that you should feel comfortable saying, like, hey, I really didn't like that you said that. Or, hey, I know you said this is happening with me, but actually, I've been experiencing this. Like, you should be able to feel comfortable to say that to your therapist. That's part of the therapeutic relationship. But if your therapist says, now, I will make an exception. You know, obviously, if somebody say something wildly, you know, transphobic, homophobic, racist, don't work through that. But like, but if they say something to you that's like, oh, I didn't like how that felt, you should be able to say that to your therapist. But a lot of times people recreate avoidance by just being like, nope, I'm just gonna get a new therapist. And that's it. Yeah. And there's lots of other stuff. I've talked to friends who have done these platforms for a long time. I couldn't. At the beginning of the pandemic, I thought I was going to. And I was getting text messages all day from like people on the app, and I was like, oh no, I can't do this. Because that to me felt like a hotline or on-call therapy. It didn't feel like a therapeutic relationship. There was no boundaries. So, yeah. There's a therapist on YouTube. I can't remember her name, but like I would definitely suggest she do a takedown.
Yes, I think I know who you're talking about. She has a few videos. They sent her cease and desist.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
yes, her. I can't remember her name either.
Yeah.
But she's on their ass.
Yeah. I feel like every month she like, and another thing.
Yeah. I'm gonna make sure to link her videos in the description so you can get more in depth about BetterHelp and how they've been harmful. But yes, she on their ass.
Yeah.
My next question is actually it will help me personally because right now I'm not working, I don't have an income, and I am still able to have access to therapy because I got a grant for therapy. So great.
Yes, come through.
But the other day I'm talking to her and I'm like, what good is this if I don't know if I can pay my rent next month? Like, how effective is this? I appreciate you. I appreciate this grant I got. But what does this do for me if I'm still worrying about paying my rent, if I'm still worried about if I can pay my Wi-Fi bill so I can look for a job, like all of this stuff. So like it's great therapy, but if we live under these systems that distress us, how effective is therapy for us?
So which one you want me to give you the like Dr. McEachern PhD answers and like the girl
Let's get both.
Okay. So so what I will say is like we do know well when it comes to the distress we experience because of life stress, depression, anxiety, we do know that therapy and when I say therapy, I mean like psychotherapy, like talk-based therapy, behavioral therapy, whatever. Like it works better than nothing. So like there have been like plenty of studies about the like effectiveness and the efficacy of therapy. So like in ideal situations, so there's this thing, oh, what is it? It's like an acronym, like when somebody is like Yavis, I think it's called, like young, socially attractive, you can interpret that however you want. Vocal, like so able to name what they're experiencing, has a higher income and otherwise successful. So that's considered the ideal therapeutic situation, right? Because supposedly all the other life stressors have been like eliminated. Because it's like you got money, you young, you doing your thing thizzle. So like the problem should just be what you're saying the problem is. In those situations, we see that therapy works better than nothing. It's like twice as effective than doing nothing about the problem. And in like high distress situations. So like we talking about I had to go to an emergency situation because of a mental health problem. We see that therapy works better than either being waitlisted or getting no treatment at all. Right. So we know that like therapy works as a concept, right? As a practice. A lot of other fields can't say that. but the other part of me that's like, okay, but to me, it feels like somebody had made this viral tweet a while ago that was like, y'all tell people to go to therapy when I think what you mean is that we need to have a revolution. Like, because therapy feels like putting like a band-aid on like a bullet wound in situations where like you said, like if I'm concerned about if I'm going to be able to pay my rent next month, like what does it matter that you gave me this like cognitive restructuring that'll help me sleep tonight? It's like, girl, I still got to worry about like my housing situation. And so I think mental health as a field is just like it's just doomed under capitalism. There's no way that we can actually in this like fee for service, you care because I'm paying you and my livelihood depends on you paying me to care. And you're the only person who cares because everybody else in my life is trying to work to pay bills and burnt out. and like don't have space to have an hour conversation a week. Like just as long as we live like that, whatever healing we get in therapy is going to be unsustainable. So it's like we might feel better that week, but then the next week we like, "Oh, girl, I need my therapy session." Like it's not, that's not sustainable. It's like we have to actually live in community. Like, and this is you didn't ask this, but this is like the way that I was practicing the last 2 years. I was in practice is I was doing a like community focused therapy. So in my very first sessions with folks, I'm like, okay, give me your address book. Who are 3 people that I can contact, like that you would give me permission to contact if something was going on with you, right? If our session is at 6 or 7 o'clock on a weekday, you're not making dinner for yourself. Let's be honest. So who can make you or bring you or drop off food on your therapy nights? Who is that person? Okay, give me their name. All right. You like who is somebody that if you need childcare to come to therapy, who wouldn't mind watching your baby for an hour? Okay, give me that person. And then if people can't think of that, because oftentimes we be so hurt, and I'm so guilty of this, that you just feel so alone in the world. Like, nobody, I don't have 3 people. I'm like, okay, okay, bet. So who is the person that you would leave your house for to drop off food if you knew they didn't have nothing right now?
Yeah.
Oh, my homegirl Chrissy. Okay, well then give me Chrissy number. All right. you know, you know, it's like oftentimes we can't do it for ourselves, especially as Black folks. So it's like we can't see it for ourselves, but we can see how we would do it for somebody else. And so a lot of times I would have to rephrase it. So like, you know, whose kids do you be having on the weekend? Because I see you, I know you don't have no kids, but you had, you know, you had that baby, you posted that picture. It's like, okay, so that might be a person that would do childcare for you. This might, so just like building a community. It also helped me to not have to do mandated reporting.
For the viewer, what is mandated reporting?
So mandated reporting essentially means that as a therapist, I am required by law to report any instances of it varies by state, but in New York, it's child abuse. If a person is a threat to themselves, meaning like they've disclosed to me that they think they want to unalive themselves, or they're a threat to somebody else, meaning that they've disclosed to me with enough information where I can identify that person, that they want to harm that person. Right. So in those 3 situations in New York State, I'm required to report it to whatever agency, either CPS, the police, whatever. And in Washington, when I was out in Washington, they have even extended mandated reporting. So in Washington, it's also elder abuse, right? So it's like if you disclose to me that you harming somebody over 65, I have to report it. It's also like sexual abuse. So not just if you report to me that like, I don't know, like you're a threat to whoever, but also if you've reported to me that this person harmed you in a sexual way, then I'm required to report that. That has always felt to me, because I've overwhelmingly worked with folks of color in my practice. Like the word gets out that there's a therapist of color, and before I know it, my whole caseload is people of color. And that has always felt to me like being a cop. Like, how can I be a safe person for you to talk about what's really happening for you if you tell me like I can't take it no more, that I'm gonna pick up the phone and be like 911? We got one. Like that's not, it's not helpful to the process of therapy. I personally feel like it further stigmatizes suicide. Like we can't even talk about it in therapy where you're supposed to go
to talk about it.
If you can't go to Bella Noches, where
the hell can you go? Like that ass though. You make me think of, because for my last job, we worked in education. So we had mandated reporters. Everyone on staff, I was a mandated reporter. I didn't work directly with kids later in my career at this organization, but I remember talking to staff and saying like, it is important that you like culturally understand these kids,
Mhm.
because you may see one thing as this, and then now you call the ACS on his
Yep.
family.
I remember one time I was seeing this group of Black girls from this high school, and this is when New Freezer came out, so you know the
Yeah.
So they would just like randomly do that in class, right? Just New Freezer, and you know my bitch too foreign. And why did this whole group initiate? Because those Black girls were doing a New Freezer dance, and the teacher referred them to the counselor, who thought that they were like having like tics, like it was like a group hysteria, that all the black girls have developed this tic. Like, it looks like a dance. Like, what are you
It
talking about?
does.
Like, what? It's just, yeah, I have so many stories like
Yeah,
that.
I agree with you. As far as the mandated reporter, it's
Yeah.
the same way in which it's like, we know calling the cops isn't
Yes.
an effective system for us. That's
Right.
that's also how I feel about the whole
Yeah.
mandated reporter thing, especially when we don't have a safe place to take these kids.
Yeah, that's the thing. I've been so there have been times where I came home from work and I just, you can't give detail, but I would just like tell my friends, like, I'm so thankful that I was the therapist who saw them. Because like people be so ready to pathologize or to feel like the savior or the hero. And I'm like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, I'm just so glad. But yeah, and I I just want to shout out to all the therapists of color that I worked with during my time in Philly, because they put me on to the concept of mandated supporting, which
Mm.
is a decolonial therapeutic practice of like basically not calling the cops on your clients.
Mhm.
And I had already been practicing elements of mandated supporting, but I didn't know that there was a whole framework out there.
I got it.
It's it's like one of those things where you're just like, I'm just organically doing this because it's against my principles to do what I'm being trained to do.
Mhm.
But yeah, mandated supporting is a whole approach that therapists of color coined and created to respond to the hostility that is mandated reporting.
All
Yeah.
right, so I want to close this, but I do want to make sure that we leave something for the people watching. So,
Mhm.
what are some ways that people can get access to therapy, alternative ways to get access to therapy?
The first thing I would say is like, don't wait until it's an emergency to seek out help, right? So most people that's when you get into like, I have to see this therapist by default, right? It's like I need somebody right now.
Yeah.
You don't
Mhm.
actually get to choose who you want to work with. So if you feel like, I don't know, I'm kind of okay right now, but we'll see, or maybe like me, I know I have like big grief anniversaries coming up. And it's like, okay, if I know that during this time of year or that time of year, I'm off a lot, I want to start looking for a therapist like 2-3 months before that. Um,
Mhm.
don't wait till it gets bad to look. That's my first suggestion. My second suggestion is, when it comes to access, look for peer support groups. Peer support groups are a good way to, first of all, find people who are struggling with the stuff you're struggling with, and
Mhm.
those are just like hubs of resources. So somebody in that group might have a therapist that they can word of mouth refer you to, and I would just speak from my experience as a therapist. Word of mouth, I take those folks over people who just like Google and find me, because
Mhm.
my clients have never like steered me wrong with a referral. you know? It's like, now have other clinicians steered me wrong with a referral? Absolutely. But usually if I've been working with somebody and they like, "Hey, I got a friend who needs a therapist," and they put they friend on to me for therapy, that
Mhm.
those have always been some of my favorite clients. Yes, I have favorite clients. I do.
She's
I do.
saying,
I
"What
do.
about it?"
And what about it? It is, yeah. There are some sessions that you really look forward to because that person is like committed. They show up. I do
Mhm.
talk-based therapy. So like, yeah, that so I would say peer support groups, ask a friend, Hey, you got a therapist? Would you recommend them? Like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and if you are the friend with a therapist, if your therapist is full, ask your therapist if they have therapy friends that you could put your friends onto. I've
Mhm.
in my experience, that has also been a good way to have a positive experience in therapy. I am always singing the praises of group therapy. I think people don't talk about group therapy enough. I don't
Mhm.
think I don't think therapists do group therapy enough. I love, love, love group therapy. Like that was one of the reasons why I did chemical dependency for so long because it's a group model. Like, and that's why it works because it's like built in
And
community.
community. Yep.
Exactly. And it's also way cheaper. So first of all, if you're doing group therapy and you're like billing and insurance, you usually can get more sessions because it's not as expensive, right? So where I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like Excelis will only cover like 12 sessions because they're anticipating paying like $180 a session. But if you're
Mhm.
in group therapy and the group therapy is only billing 40, 60, sometimes it can be as low as $25 a session, you can get a lot
Mhm.
more sessions because that 180 that they've allotted actually goes a lot further. Group therapy, and if you like, well, where the hell do I find group therapy? A lot of universities that offer degrees for people to get
Mhm.
their like master's or PhD in mental health, they have in-house clinics, and the therapists in training and like their supervisors and stuff, they need clients. And so that's a great place to get low cost, sometimes it's even free, or group therapy. And okay, this is my last thing I'm gonna say, Queen. But this is part of the reason why I say licensure is a scam because like I think people hear that you're licensed and they think that that means that you're a better therapist. It should mean that, but it don't. Like it don't even mean that somebody has more experience than another person because I will tell y'all, I worked at a site where my clinical supervisor was a white woman who was very bigoted and she refused to sign off on my hours, which meant that none of the hours that I did at that site counted towards my licensure. In New York State, I think you need 2,000 or 3,000 hours to be licensed. And so I worked there for a year and a half. All those sessions that I did, she refused to sign it because in her words, it just felt like we didn't have a relationship. But she signed off
Mhm.
on the white girl who was my peer in that program. She signed off on hours that she didn't even complete. She was just like,
Mm.
you should be licensed here, you know? And the people at the state department who are just like checking boxes to see if you have all the
Yeah.
requirements, they
They're not.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think they're gonna be like, oh, this person did 3,000 hours real fast? Let me call. Maybe if they audit the program, but that's not
Mhm.
that's not happening really. So this person goes on, gets her license way before I do because I have to start from scratch. I have to find a clinical supervisor that is not going to deny signing my hours just because it doesn't feel like we have a relationship. So I share that little anecdote of my personal experience to say just because somebody has a license doesn't mean that they have more experience than somebody else. And
Mhm.
also, don't sleep on therapists in training because when a therapist is still in their master's program or still working on their PhD, there's probably at least two supervisors that are looking at their work. So
Mhm.
that means you getting three therapists for the price of one. Right? So you have the therapist you actually seeing, but then they have a clinical supervisor. They might have an off-site supervisor. They might have a group supervisor. Like
Mhm.
there's so many levels of are you doing good therapy when you're training? So I would say don't sleep on that. So if there's a school near you that has a program where somebody can get their master's or PhD, they probably have a clinic and you can probably get in there for next to nothing. Like when I was out in Washington, I think clients paid anywhere from $5 to $12 for sessions or free. So where I got my PhD, our on-site clinic was totally free. open to the public, right? Because we need clients. Like,
yeah,
we got to get these hours to graduate. In my program, you needed 1,000 hours to graduate, right? So we got to get clients. Yeah, so I would suggest those. And then I think these are really popular now, but there are a lot of, what do you call those things? Databases for therapists of color, queer therapists. Yeah.
There's therapy for Black girls. There's there's a lot of those.
Yeah, it's a lot. National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network, Beam, I forget the other one. Yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot of I think the Loveland Foundation, like
that's how I got my grant.
Yeah. There's a lot of places that have like a directory of therapists who have intentionally signed. Open Path is another one.
Collective.
That's like, hey, I want to work with people who can't afford like traditional therapy, and also I have expertise in working with marginalized populations, right? So so I think that's a pretty good sign if a therapist is listed on those directories, that they're like, hey, I'm here because I want to see y'all. So yeah, check those out.
I'm so grateful that Dr. Money joined me for that conversation. I don't know if you could tell or not, but that conversation was actually 1 hour and 45 minutes. There is more that her and I talked about, but I do like to keep my videos at the hour mark. So if you want to check out the rest of the conversation Money and I had, you can join my Patreon at I think it's at the $8 tier for the full conversation. The conversation that we had here was so great that I'm sure you got a lot of information either way. Make sure you follow Dr. Money. I have all of her social media handles in the description box. And I also have in the description box all of the therapy resources that Money let us know about in the video. Also, let me know, are you in therapy? What is your experience with therapy? Do you like therapy? Do you think therapy is not enough and we need to just burn it all down? Talk to me in the comments. I really, really would like to know, your thoughts on that. I had you here long enough, and I'm grateful that you joined me all the way to the end of this video. I haven't done this in a while, but if you made it to the end of the video, please put an emoji in the comments that will express to me how this conversation made you feel. Sometimes writing a whole comment is too much. So if you just want to put in an emoji to communicate to me how this conversation resonated with you, I welcome that also. And as always, remember, you are a bad bitch, you are enough. Stay fly, and I will see you in the next video if I get my computer fixed. Okay, bye.
Ever since I left your crib yesterday, trying to work but it's hard to concentrate.